Hello. So in this video we will look at book 2 of Plato's Republic. In the Republic, Plato defines the nature of justice and argues that it is worthwhile in and of itself. So as we know, in Plato's writings, he doesn't write as if he is giving his own opinions directly, but rather he presents it through the figure of his mentor, his teacher, Socrates. And in the Republic, Socrates is approached by different people who ask him about the nature of justice, ask him to define the nature of justice, and who ask him to prove that justice is actually a good thing. It is good to be a just person. It is not just good but also desirable to be a just person. And Socrates engages in dialogues with them and tries to prove this. So that is what happens in the Republic. And in order to do that, in order to prove that justice is actually not just good but also desirable, Socrates creates this entire idea of an ideal city, which is later called the Republic. So that is the whole idea of Plato's Republic. It is said that Plato wrote the Republic to counter the claims of a set of philosophers who were very influential in Greece during that time, called the Sophists. The Sophists were rather like anti-philosophers. They did not believe in the value of concepts like truth, goodness, justice, etc., but rather they were highly opportunistic, and they presented opportunism as a virtue. So they emphasized persuasiveness over truth and denied the existence or necessity of objective moral standards. So there is no such thing as truth if you can be very persuasive, if you can persuade other people into believing what you say. That is better than actually following truth. That is what the Sophists claimed. They also said that there is no such thing as an objective moral standard. There is no such thing as objectively good or objectively bad, but rather you can twist morality according to what suits you the best. And if you do all these things, then you will be a very clever person and you will get success in life. So that is what the Sophists believed and propagated. And Plato wanted to counter their claims to show that truth, morality, justice, etc., all these are not just necessary, but also they are good things that we should desire for their own sake. So the Republic is, as I already mentioned, it is written in the form of dialogues between Socrates and his disciples. Now, the early part of Republic and some of Plato's early works featuring Socrates use what is called the Socratic method. Socratic method, the Greek term for that is elenchus. Elenchus is a method in which Socrates engages in a cycle of definitions, revisions and rebuttals with his interlocutors on concepts like piety, courage, etc., until a satisfactory conclusion is reached. So somebody will come and ask Socrates, what is courage, what is piety, what is truth, and he will engage with them in a cycle of definitions, revisions and rebuttals. So he will, instead of him defining something, he will ask them, so what do you think is truth, what do you think is courage, and they will give a definition, and then he will question them and make them revise their definition. And when they come with a revised definition, he will again question. So this questioning is called rebuttal. So he will make them come up with answers, and then he will question those answers, and he will make them refine their answers more and more and more. So this method is called the Socratic method or elenchus. Now, most of Socrates' dialogues end in a deadlock called aporia. Aporia is also an important term here. So elenchus is the Socratic method of coming to conclusions using dialogues, and many of these dialogues end in aporia. which is a deadlock, which means a place where, after a lot of discussions, you reach a place where you decide, where you realize that everything that you believed so far was wrong, and you don't know what to believe anymore, you don't know where to move after this. So that is the kind of aporia or deadlock that most of Socrates' dialogues end in, rather than in full understanding. So it is not like Socrates ends the dialogue by saying, see, everything that you said was wrong, now I will tell you what is right. He doesn't do that. But rather, he makes the interlocutor means the one who is asking him questions. He makes the interlocutor realize that his understanding is flawed, but the interlocutor is not taught instead what is true knowledge. The person who was having the dialogue with Socrates realizes that whatever he believed in, whatever he understood was wrong, and his understanding was flawed, but Socrates does not instead teach him what is true knowledge. Instead, he leaves him free to search after true knowledge. So there is a certain open-endedness to Socrates' dialogues. They always end in this aporia. But in the initial books, Plato used this elenchus, the Socratic method, which ends in aporia, but later he began to believe that elenchus is dangerous in the wrong hands. So he doesn't want to propagate this method. He thinks only somebody like Socrates can use it because it is something that worked for Socrates. But in the wrong hands, people can use elenchus to just destroy people's convictions. And that can end in a very, what we call a very postmodernist or post-structuralist understanding that there is absolutely no knowledge. Knowledge is impossible. But that is not what Socrates is trying to do. And that is why Plato, in his later works, avoids using elenchus. Instead, he makes Socrates lecture on the subject of justice in books 2 and 3 of the Republic in an attempt to build a positive theory. So in book 1, he actually uses elenchus, and that he engages with with certain people. He engages with noblemen known as Cephalus and Polemarchus. He engages with a sophist named Thrasymachus, and also 2 disciples who are also Plato's brothers, Glaucon and Adeimantus. So all these 5 people talk to Socrates about the nature of justice in book 1, and by the end of book 1, he demolishes the arguments of Cephalus, Polemarchus and the sophist Thrasymachus, but he does not go on to say what his own belief is. So book 1 kind of uses the Socratic method of elenchus properly, but in books 2 and 3, Plato moves on from that, and he makes Glaucon and Adeimantus ask questions to Socrates, and they are his disciples, so they are looking to him for knowledge, and Socrates actually does try to lecture and provide knowledge. So that is a difference that we can see between book 1, which represents the early writings of Plato, and books 2 and 3, which represent his later writings. So in the first book, Thrasymachus, as I already mentioned, the sophist, he is a sophist, and the sophists do not believe in the existence or necessity of values, of virtues, including justice, but Plato defends justice against Thrasymachus in book 1. And by doing that, he is actually defending philosophy, because Socrates was actually, as you know, he was considered to be a heretic, because he used to stand in the marketplace in Athens and he would talk to everybody about philosophy, and he would make everybody question their convictions. So he was somebody who questioned everything, and therefore he was considered to be a heretic. He was considered to be somebody who went against the gods, and he was imprisoned and later executed. So philosophy was actually the sacrilegious activity, the so-called sacrilegious activity for which Socrates was executed. And in book 1, by making Socrates defend justice against Thrasymachus and the sophists, Plato is actually using the figure of his mentor to defend philosophy, the activity for which his mentor was actually executed. So that is an interesting thing to think about. Now, in book 2, in book 1, Socrates has already, in some sense, justified the existence of justice to Thrasymachus. After their discussion, Glaucon, Plato's brother and Socrates' student, says, he starts addressing Socrates, and he says, see, this is what I wish to hear from you. Human beings usually think that desirable things are of three types. This is Glaucon saying that the things which we find desirable are usually of three types. One, those that are good in their consequences but not enjoyable in and of themselves, such as medical treatment. We all know that medical treatment is good for you. Ultimately, the consequences are good, the results are good. But we don't enjoy medical treatment. We don't enjoy taking medicine because medicine is usually bitter. We don't enjoy the process of medical treatment. It might even be painful for us, but the consequence is good. So, that is the first type of desirable things. The thing itself, the process itself is not very enjoyable, but the consequences are good, and therefore we accept them as a kind of necessary evil. The second type is those that are enjoyable but not good, such as joy and pleasure. So there are some things which we enjoy, the process, like we drink a good wine, or we eat good food, or we basically indulge in joy and pleasure. So those are enjoyable, but the consequences may not be good. If you eat a lot of good food, you may have a stomach upset, right? So like that, if you indulge yourself too much, you may have to face adverse consequences. Those are the second type of desirable things. And the third type, which Glaucon says is the highest class, are things which are both enjoyable in and of themselves and also good in their consequences. So the process is also enjoyable, the results are also good. For example, knowledge, sight and health. These are the three examples that Glaucon gives of the third and highest class of desirable things. Knowledge is good. It's nice to read and understand things. At the same time, knowledge also has good consequences because it will make you wiser in your life. Similarly, health, being healthy, doing healthy things, engaging in physical exercise and all, running, walking and all those things, you can enjoy that, but it is also good for your health. It has good consequences. So there are three types of desirable things. Now, Glaucon wishes Socrates to prove that justice belongs to this third category, that is, justice is both enjoyable and also has good consequences, even though most people believe that it's a necessary evil and therefore belongs to the first category. Normally people would think that, okay, justice is good even though you may not enjoy it. We have to be good, we have to be just to other people, so the consequences of justice are always good, but the process may be actually painful to you, because to be just you may have to give up your own selfish desires. So that is what people normally believe. People believe that justice is like the first type of good things, good in its consequences but not good or enjoyable in its process. Instead, Glaucon says, if we are to defend justice, we should be able to say that it belongs to the highest class of desirable things. It is good, it is enjoyable, but the consequences are also good. So can you prove that? That is what Glaucon asks Socrates. And because he is his disciple, he is not challenging Socrates, but rather he is looking to Socrates for a proper answer. And Glaucon says that people are usually just not because they wish to be, but because they fear the consequences of being discovered to be unjust. People are just, people do good things not because it comes naturally to them, not because they wish to be just, but because they are afraid, what if I am unjust, and what if I am discovered to be unjust? Then I will have to face some consequence. Either I will have to face some legal consequences if my injustice is discovered, or I will have to face some kind of societal consequence where people start treating me like an unjust person. So because everybody believes that justice is a good thing, I am also being just, not because I really want to be, but because I don't want people to realize that I am unjust. So this is what Glaucon says. Now, continuing with this, Glaucon gives the example of a mythical item that he calls the ring of Gyges. This is an important concept in book 2, the ring of Gyges. It is not a real ring, it is an imaginary ring that makes its wearer invisible. So Glaucon says, imagine that we have a ring that can make us invisible if we wear it. If so, he argues, even a just man would do injustice if given the ring of Gyges, since he can do so without being discovered and thus being exempt from bearing the consequences of his actions. So, if you have a ring that makes you invisible, you can do anything, you can do any kind of injustice, nobody will discover it, nobody will find out, and you will not have to bear the consequences of your actions. If you are given a ring like that, anybody, even the most just man, will do injustice if he is sure that he will not be found out. This is what Glaucon says. He also argues that it is rational for people to believe unjustly, since the completely unjust man who indulges all his urges is honored and rewarded with wealth, while the completely just man is scorned and wretched. So he says, if we look at society, we will find that somebody who is completely unjust, who indulges all his urges, who is completely selfish, who doesn't care about other people's needs at all, that kind of a person is usually the kind of person who becomes successful, who becomes honored in society, and who gets wealth. Because if you're very selfish and you don't care about other people, then obviously you can make a lot of money, you can accumulate a lot of wealth, and that is what we see in society. But if there is a man who is completely just, then he will be very self-sacrificing. He will not have anything. He will give up everything for the sake of helping other people, and society will scorn that man because he will be poor and he will continue to remain poor and wretched. This is what we see in society so far. So people believe that it is rational to be unjust because being unjust will make you wealthy and successful. Being just will only make you poor and scorned in the eyes of the world. So Glaucon says this is what people believe. So how do we then say that justice is a desirable thing? Glaucon's brother Adeimantus also supports him by saying that no one praises justice for its own sake, but only for the rewards it allows you to reap in this life and the next. People say that if you are just, you will be rewarded. So if you see a theft happening and you report it, that is a just activity, maybe you will be rewarded by the state or by the rich person whose belongings were stolen. Or if you are not rewarded in this life, you will be rewarded in the next life or in the afterlife. When you die, you will go to heaven if you have been a just person. So that is what people say. People usually say that justice will be rewarded, which is to say that justice is not enough by itself. The pleasure that you get from being just is not enough. Instead, you need a reward. So justice is like something that is not very pleasurable, is slightly painful for you, and it has to be countered with some kind of a reward. That is the only reason why people become just. So there are two reasons for people to be just in a society according to Glaucon and Adeimantus. One is that people are afraid of being considered unjust, but if they can do injustice without being discovered, they will definitely do it. Secondly, people are promised some kind of rewards either in this life or in the afterlife, and that is why they do justice. Nobody is just for the pleasure of being just. Now, Socrates tries to answer Glaucon and Adeimantus' questions, and he says, okay, we will discuss justice, but it is easier to discuss justice in the context of a city rather than an individual. And then he says, now let us imagine an ideal city, and this is where the ideal city or the republic comes. So this is why he's talking about the republic, in order to show the importance of justice. While talking about his ideal city, he also talks about a very important principle called the principle of specialization. This is very important to the republic. The principle of specialization is the idea that each person must perform the role for which he or she is most suited and not meddle in any other business. So if you are, so the idea is that by nature human beings are good, they are talented at certain things, and they should be encouraged to only do those kind of jobs and not interfere in anything else. So if you are somebody whose natural talent is that of a farmer, then you should be a farmer. You shouldn't try to be a doctor or a cricket player or something else. So, like that, each person has some kind of a latent natural talent, and they should be encouraged to follow, to perform the roles which suit their talents and not anything else. Now, according to this principle of specialization, Plato says that this ideal city develops in three stages. In the first stage, the city is populated only by producers. Here he refers to the farmers, craftsmen, doctors, etc. People who produce things for your basic needs. Socrates calls it the healthy city because it is a very self sufficient city and everybody just produces what they can consume and they help each other and everything is fine. There is no crime, there is no unnecessary stuff. This is the healthy city. But Locke calls this a kind of city of pigs. He says human beings need something more than these basic necessities. If we live like this, then we are living like pigs, like animals. And instead, we also need not just food, not just shelter and clothing, but also something to nurture our mind and our souls. So, therefore, Socrates says that in the second stage, the city expands to include luxuries like art and music. So, once everybody has all their basic necessities, then they have extra time. So, then they can spend some time appreciating art and music and they can indulge a little bit in luxuries. Socrates calls this the luxurious city or city with a fever. So, people start slowly indulging themselves more and more. And with this new kind of lifestyle, a new class of people are introduced called the auxiliaries. These are not the primary producers, but people who help the primary producers or people who do some other tasks not related to fulfilling the basic needs, like merchants, actors, poets, tutors, beauticians, etc. So, if you produce a lot of things more than you can consume, then you need to sell it to somebody who doesn't have them, or you need to take it to a different city and sell it there. And therefore, you need merchants. If you have a lot of leisure time, then there will be art and music to fill that leisure time. So, you need actors, poets, etc. You need beauticians or people who will make you beautiful, who will also paint and make the entire city beautiful. You need tutors because if art and literature are developing, then you need teachers to tell you how to appreciate art and literature. So this new kinds of people are what Plato calls the auxiliaries. Now, in the third stage, all of this wealth will lead to wars. So, a class of warriors or guardians will also be needed to keep peace within the city and to protect the city from outside forces. If everybody is indulging themselves, then they might start fighting among themselves for all this wealth, or other countries will start attacking the city. So, we need some people both to police the city within itself and to protect it from outside forces. So the warriors or guardians are like a combination of both the police and the military. They will keep peace within the city. They will make sure that there is no theft or any other kind of problem in the city, and they will also protect the city from outside forces. And these guardians are the most important class according to Socrates, and it is their upbringing and education is very, very important. So in the rest of book 2 and in book 3, Socrates is interested in talking about what kind of education should be provided to these guardians, and it is as a result of that, it is as a corollary of that that he talks about the kind of art, the kind of poetry, the kind of stories that guardians should be exposed to and the kind of stories that they should not be exposed to. And this is where Plato's critique of art comes in. So Plato is not actually directly interested in talking about art. He is interested in talking about justice, and in order to talk about justice, he makes Socrates his figure. He makes Socrates talk about the ideal city, and in the ideal city there are all these three types of people: according to the principle of specialization, the producers, auxiliaries, and the guardians are the most important. If the guardians are corrupt, the entire city will be corrupt, and if the guardians are virtuous, then the entire city will be virtuous. It will be an ideal city. So it is a very utopian view that Plato holds here, and to propagate that utopian view, he also talks about what kind of art should be appropriate for the guardian's education. So we will talk more about that in the next video, and we will end this here. So book 2 is not complete. There is a bit more of book 2 where he talks about the education of the guardians. So in the next video we will look at that part of book 2 and also book 3. Thank you.